Okay, we're recording.
Well,
That didn't
it's
work.
not working.
Ship bell.
Ship Bell Hotel.
Ding.
Okay. I should have tried. Oh, wait a minute. It helps to turn it on. There.
There.
Okay.
Okay. Can I welcome people now?
Call to order.
So what? Okay, I'm going to welcome people
Okay.
except Chuck. But anyway,
Pledge.
welcome to the October 22nd meeting of the E Club of North Texas. And let's see, you
We're going
said
to pledge for you.
the pledge.
Yes.
Can you ignore the fact that I'm sitting down? If I stand up, the laptop falls on the floor. So anyway, I can salute the commandant said Marines King, but go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Okay.
The only business that I think we have, like I said, David and I worked out at the Challenge Air last Saturday. There were like 120 kids. And then we met with Blake Lindsay of the Lighthouse for the Blind. And we also met with him again yesterday. And then coming up Friday, we will have our Halloween party starting at 3 o'clock. And we had a couple that have moved down here from Illinois. They were in Rotary, and they've been coming to some of our activities. So it looks like we may have 1 or 2 more members. Other than that, I don't have anything. We're working on a date for our holiday party. It will probably be our December meeting date. I have to check with the Dindies to see if we can use their house, or if somebody wants to set up a restaurant or whatever. Let me know so we can start planning that. Other than that, I don't have anything. Do you want to go with?
How do you have a?
Do you have anything, Howard?
Party?
No, I'm just wondering, what is Rotary doing anything with the tornado victims in our area?
Well, we have just set up a district disaster coordination, and right now, Glenn and Vicki Campbell, their house was totally destroyed. They're, I think, doing laundry today. They're staying with the Webbs, Larry and Larry Webb, and so that's all that I've heard as far as damage, as far as Rotarians.
Okay.
But even Glenn and Vicki have said that they're doing what they can. They're supposed to be leaving town on some tour or something, and so they're just going to leave town and let things roll. And that's about all that we have heard so far.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask because you're plugged into all that.
Yeah, and so we just started this at the last roundtable. So, and here we have a disaster. And Jim, in case you haven't heard, we had 4 tornadoes here on Sunday night.
Right, we just pulled in on the weekend, so yeah, we were aware.
Okay.
There was 6. There was 6 tornadoes.
Oh, now they've upped it to 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was
Wait,
1 F3, 1 F2.
Wait a minute.
There was
I think you
several
missed one
F1s
of the
and there was a couple
tornadoes.
F0s.
Okay. Well, at this time, Chuck, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Well, okay, I'll do that. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the Eat Club, even though I can't see you guys and everything. But at the same time, Jim Carmichael was friends with my wife, and his wife, the woman he married, was his friend too. And so those 3 kind of went to high school and graduated from high school with each other. And so we've known them ever since high school. Okay. Now Jim is a Marine. He served a tour of combat in Vietnam, with the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. Okay. He spent 77 days on the hills at Quezon, in the 68 Tet Offensive. In other words, he was right in the middle of all the fight. And the 26th Marine Regiment, which he was a part of, was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for the siege at Quezon that they did. It was amazing. Anyway, PTSD history. He was diagnosed with PTSD in 1997, and in 2006 he attempted suicide because of the PTSD. He was chaplain for 6 years with the advisory committee of the Georgia National Cemetery. He has a Master's of Divinity agreement, and he has a PhD. His dissertation was on post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, he's pastored churches, and he's also taught in numerous countries. Okay, his first publication, a book that he has right now, and this is the one that we get sent information to everybody. Well, Linda has it. She sent it out. It's called The Long Healing Comes Slowly. It's about PTSD, and that's his first book. He spent 20 years basically writing that book. Okay, he's had PTSD for over 60 years. Okay, he's just finished 2 more books that he's getting ready to publish that are follow-ups to that book. He's been interviewed on WATC Channel 7 a couple of times, and he's been interviewer and was interviewed many times on WPCG, which is Grace Radio 102.9 in the Atlanta area. So anyway, this is Jim Carmichael, a man I respect, and a man that's been through a lot.
Hi there. I'm back to drinking again after that introduction.
You have to listen through your headset.
John, what were you? You were in the Army, so did you do a couple of tours overseas? Was it John?
Howard.
Howard. No, not Howard. Never mind. Just got out of the Army, right?
Robert.
Robert, yeah. That's what I said. John.
Oh, okay. That is my middle name, which is funny, Robert John. That's very insightful of you.
Hey, what the heck?
Yeah, I've been fortunate where I didn't have any IED blasts, but I've been to Iraq and other areas. But yeah, there's a lot of folks out there, and this is a significant problem, and the Army still hasn't solved it. Not just the Army. This is an all of DOD or Department of Defense issue, and you're living proof that you can beat it, and we have to beat it. But really, we need to beat it together as a community.
Yeah. Well, that's, I spent quite a bit of time with the, in the VAMC in their PTSD wards, so I'm fairly well versed on, what they were, what they're trying to promote and do with the guys. So, my dad had PTSD from his tour of Korea. He flew medevacs for the Marine Corps, and so when he came home, basically he took his frustrations out on me and my mom and so forth, and he was setting me up for combat trauma things, and so life was really hard under him. And I'm sure I did the same thing with my kids when they were growing up, but I didn't have a diagnosis until later. So in my own research, the people that come up with PTSD, the diagnosis are first responders, obviously combat veterans, but women who've been abused, rape victims, and so forth, and children of of abuse and so forth, and it's there, and we've got to do something about it. But those are the people that basically wrestle with that issue. So most of the guys that I serve with have a good dose of it. Stressors for PTSD. Things like obviously combat, incoming. When I was on the Caisson, it was every day we were taking incoming and losing a lot of guys, and it just, there's no way to get away from it when you're in a combat situation. For the police, it's more progressive PTSD. Let me read something to you here if I could. This has to do with, I really don't believe that PTSD needs to be put under mental illness. I think it involves the biology, chemistry, neurobiology, anatomical, chemical, the whole 9 yards. It's not just schizophrenia or some kind of mental thing that you're born with. It's putting your brain and your body under continual stress, and the brain begins to change. And I think that's one of the problems with the VA is only one doctor that I've been around brought up the idea of the sympathetic nervous system. When you get put in that nutcracker and it goes up, and at first it can come down a little bit, but it eventually just stays up here and it never comes back down. The amygdala increases in size, the hippocampus shrinks, and you've got all kinds of issues, so that instead of just giving a pill and saying, okay, come on, tell me what's going on, and that's basically the treatment that I was getting. The groups really did me no good. So my presupposition is it's much more physical. And I found some particular, let's see, this guy's name is Joel Piper from UC San Diego, and he agrees with me. He says many consider PTSD to be a psychological disorder, but our study found a key physical difference in the brain of military-trained individuals with brain injury and PTSD, specifically the size of the right amygdala. These findings have the potential to change the way we approach PTSD diagnosis and treatment.
Excuse me, Chuck, can you turn your volume down?
Yeah.
Often is,
We're getting a lot of feedback.
So what happens is, I've got like 23 pages in my first volume here of just research. You can't get two scientists or two researchers or two psychologists to agree on much of anything. And so when you're dealing with the brain, you've got, they use words like possibility or if, or our thesis is, and so it's like nailing Jello to the wall to say, okay, this is going to work, or this is going to work, this has the potential to work. And so that kind of, they're doing the very best that they can, obviously better than what we had in Vietnam, but it is a frustration. And so let me see here. Definition, let me give you a definition of PTSD. because a lot of people really don't know what we're dealing with here when we talk about this. The standard definition, I guess, is it's a psychiatric disorder that can occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, combat, rape, or other violent personal assault. The definition says this disorder can occur. Well, there's another issue that researchers and doctors are still struggling with. Why do some people get PTSD and some people don't? And I've had to deal with it. I have an answer for that, and for me it's very simple, which I'll get to here in a minute. So PTSD is this thing that it comes about by stress, traumatic stress, and the brain begins to change in these various ways so that the way you used to react to things, you no longer react that way. You react with violence and aggression and rage and so forth. And, as I was told by a first lieutenant, the Marine Corps is not into anger management. Well, that's exactly right. There's nothing more violent than a 19-year-old with an automatic weapon. The problem is when he comes back, he is still wound up. The brain is still changed, and you've got to deal with that. And as you may be aware, the marriages are really struggling. You've got women that are committing suicide when their husbands go overseas, and they're trying to figure out what I do here. How do I live with this guy I suspect is coming back, and he's got his own demons, and so my research has been moving not just for the veteran but for families and so forth. My reason for writing had to do with the information and diagnosis of the VA and of psychiatry in general. I just wasn't satisfied, and I would talk to other guys that have been through the same PTSD counseling thing, and we're all kind of saying there's something wrong here. There's nothing here. So that's probably the reason that set me on the course to writing about this and coming up with something different. The other thing is you've got, I'm guessing somewhere around 98, 99% of the doctors in the VA, whether they come from India or Pakistan or they're American born, none of them have been in combat. So they're prescribing for us how they see it. Many of them are atheistic materialists. So my question at that point is, why do they even care? They've got to live in my world, the Christian world, to have a reason to treat people. So all this stuff, I had to come up with a different process. So that promoted this whole thing. In terms of my own reaction and the way I deal with or have dealt with PTSD, I remember, let's say somewhere around 3 or 4 years after I came home, I used to work at General Dynamics, and some of you are probably familiar with that big plant. They were building the F-111 fighter, and my job was the wing pivot of that airplane. And so I would do that all day, and I'd come home and I'd just basically lie on the floor and stare at the ceiling, and my wife is trying to get me to communicate. I didn't want to talk to anybody, I just wanted to get away, leave me alone, and so we had all kinds of problems because I just didn't want to be around people. and that's hard to make a marriage work. So through that process, I began to start looking at what's really going on inside of me. And I began to notice some things that were consistent. Things like when something triggers you, like your wife, or she says something, or somebody pulls in front of you in traffic or whatever, I noticed that there was a time when it felt like, to me, you're climbing in the vortex of a cyclone and you're just being tossed pillar to post. And then there was a time when that stopped. Sometimes it was worse inside that thing, but it always had the same, what am I trying to say? It always worked the same way. There was a start, there was a duration, there was an end. So I began to notice, okay, I think I'm going to go into this thing, and I'd go through it, and then I would come out the other side. And so that gave me a way of dealing with it. Okay, everybody stand back, let me go through this. And, well, that's okay. The problem is that doesn't help anybody. It just lets me know and everybody else, okay, I'm going through this, please leave me alone. So I came up with my own definition of PTSD that I think matches reality. I'm speaking here again as a Christian, and I have to have some way of saying, okay, what's reality? I believe that the scriptures declare who God is. And so in that, I'm trying to be consistent with my own worldview and my own theology. So I came up with this acrostic, GLITZ. The I is something I added to it, so it would have it would sound like a noun, but it's GLITCS. And so what I did was I looked at how I view PTSD in light of the Bible and God and so forth. And so taking the Westminster Confession, Westminster Shorter Catechism, question number 1, what's the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So the G stands for glorifying God. What I mean by that is I believe that God had from all eternity past determined I would go into the Marine Corps, I would go to Vietnam, I would come back with PTSD and begin to work on this so that I could fit combat PTSD or any other kind in the framework of the reality of God and the scriptures. So the first idea of PTSD is to glorify God. Now, by that, I mean, I thank God that he sent me to Vietnam. Not that it was a lot of fun. That's not the point. The point is I came back with PTSD, and God has used that for good. So I don't look at PTSD as a negative thing. I look at it as the potential for anybody in my shoes to say, there's an upside to this thing. The L stands for God's motivating love, that he took me through this to come out the other side and understand this. God didn't wake up one day and he's mad at me, so he's just beating the tar out of me with PTSD. I wouldn't have come to know Christ without this. So the T has to do with, I believe that PTSD is a tool that God uses to get our attention. Many of us dumb jarheads are type A personalities, and so it takes something to get our attention. And that's exactly what PTSD does, at least in my case, because I reached the bottom. My marriage was going kaput. In 2006, I was so tired of being sad, I just took a whole bottle of sleeping pills, and I was just done. Now, this remind you, I was a seminary graduate, soon to be a PhD, and just because you say you're a Christian doesn't mean you're immune from that sort of thing. Well, obviously I'm still here, so none of that, I expected to wake up in the presence of the Lord, and instead I woke up a couple hours later, wondering, why am I still alive? Well, PTSD is a tool that God used in my life to bring me to reality and to trust him. The C has to do with the changes in the brain. This is one of the problems I see with the VA. They never talk about it, except for that one doctor that I've met in Denver talking about the sympathetic nervous system. It's just, you go in, you tell them how you're doing, they adjust your meds if you need it, and that's it. So, and the S stands for God's sovereignty. I don't believe I was in any danger whatsoever in Vietnam, and that sounds like an oxymoron, but I'm here. God brought me through all that, and it's just been a marvelous, very difficult. In 2016, God took all the pain of Vietnam away. Now I was thinking seriously about the cross, the crucifixion, the life and death work of Christ, the resurrection, and so forth. And I realized going through that process that God nailed Vietnam to the wall, all of it. And I didn't need to keep going to the cross and kind of mentally pulling it down, because I understood everything that went with Vietnam. It was, it just felt depression and anger. It was a well-traveled road I had, and all of a sudden it wasn't there anymore. And so I am really a different guy. Still struggle with things, but not to the degree I was. I can talk about Vietnam, and so that's my that's how I deal with it. I'm not about to say the VA hasn't helped people. I mean, there's certainly much more there for the guys now than with us coming back from Vietnam. However, the way I think a Christian has to look at that is, if I could give somebody that has PTSD a pill and say, okay, here, take this. This will put your brain back where it used to be. And the guy walks out and gets hit by a bus. I haven't really done him any good. And by that, I mean, he still has to face eternity. And so, in fact, PTSD is not man's combat veteran's biggest problem. It has to do with a relationship with Christ and facing God in terms of eternity. So my road to recovery, so to speak, didn't begin until I became a Christian. And I went through the doctrinal process. It's doctrine that's gotten me where I am. And so that's my story, and I'm going to stick to it. These books that I wrote were written not so that they weren't cathartic in any way. It was, I needed to put down how this thing works. And so I sent the manuscript off to the Vietnam Veterans magazine and Kirkus and a number of other places. And the reviews came back very, very positive in terms of the Vietnam veterans guys said I nailed it as far as what PTSD is. And all I was doing was writing about myself. My second two books I just finished last week. This has to do with, the first one has to do with, let's see, well, the first chapter is what is PTSD. Second one, misdiagnosis of PTSD, an abbreviated history of PTSD. And the what happens in the brain. The second volume has to do with, here's how I think you resolve this and get on the right track. So the second book is titled, So You've Seen the Elephant and You Have PTSD. What do you do now? So I felt like I needed to put that in 2 volumes because 1 volume would be way too big. So the books, I don't make any money off of. I had a great time writing it. I'm working on the follow-up volume or novel for that. The books are $20 a piece, and Chuck has all that information. So, gosh. Any questions? Well, seeing there are no questions.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean,
Sure.
this is Bob, and I'm sure it affects everybody in the room. So 1, I want to thank you for your courage. 2, I want to thank you for your faith. I'm a man of faith as well, and all things come from the Lord. Now, and I really like how you put that together, because you made a framework which becomes a strategy, and it's something you can walk people through, which is a very, very difficult process, but it does take a step-by-step, you know what I mean? It takes that process, and you walk them through, it sounds like, in your book, which is tremendous. Now, I also believe that God has inspired you to write this through your circumstance, because you're exactly right, that you're standing here today, you know, as a testimony, one of God's greatness. I thought you made something, you know, really amazing discovery there when you talk about the sympathetic nervous system and the enlarged, engrossed amygdala. As everyone knows, the amygdala is the fight or flight. And when your brain is put on hyper alert status day after day, month after month, even year after year, depending on how long you've been in the service. And I just finished up 30 years, so there's multiple trips and iterations and all kinds of things. And if you don't deal with it, it builds. And I like the discovery you came up with. It actually rewires the brain. And I think that's an essential function and an essential discovery, because we have the neuroscience and the different technologies to support that and to back that up. But there's things that we can do, and I'll just go to the word on this. And it talks about in Philippians 4, don't worry about anything. Instead, this is 4, instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. Sure. The productivity gurus are finding out more and more how much thankfulness does and provides and rewires the brain. Romans 12, you know, this talks about be not conformed into the likeness of the world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. This is in the mind. And then Paul actually gives us the solution here, where he says in Philippians 4:8, now, dear brothers and sisters, let me say one more thing before I close this letter. Fix your thoughts on what is true, honorable, and right. Think about things that are pure, lovely, and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting them into practice. That what you saw me doing, and the God of peace will be with you. My friend, you have been seeking peace. You called them demons. Absolutely, there's spiritual harassment that occurs. There's no doubt about it. But we can find the peace which surpasses all understanding, comes through Christ. But he gave us the solution right there. Set your sights on what is true, honorable, right, and right. When we are not careful what we set our minds on, these destructive thoughts, they do become patterns, and they become deep habits. That's the problem with our thinking. We've got to get ahead of our thinking, the stories we tell ourselves, because we're wiring success or defeat. Henry Ford said around the turn of the century, whether you think you can or you cannot, either way, you're right. Mm-hmm. Because why? You've wired a success or a failure pattern into your life. So these discoveries, my friend and Jim, I hope you'll take them beyond just the PTSD world, because this generation is hijacked by these devices. And me and Howard have talked about this. And I believe, and in studies that I've seen, their amygdalas and their limbic systems are actually enlarged and engrossed because all of the likes and all the digital stress that they're under, the digital trauma, so to speak. Oh, they didn't like my post. It sounds silly to us, but it's actually rewiring a whole generation's brains. And the problem is the prefrontal cortex is where your deep executive thinking takes place. And that doesn't stop developing until age 25. And if these kids are not developing a prefrontal cortex, they're actually stunted for life. And Howard, you can maybe back me up a little bit on that with some of your brain studies.
Yes, they found that by the time they got older, the damage was permanent because of the distress they had as children.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I've learned in doing this that I didn't expect to find is how positive this whole process has been, because, you know, you come back from combat and everything's negative. But the other thing is you have to know how to think about PTSD, and that's what the scripture gives you, which is what you're saying, Robert. And it changes everything, you know. So I had to rename PTSD because it's a kind of a negative, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, if God is ultimately sovereign, which he is, then we start off with his glory and you move from there. So, you know, whether this will ever catch on is not the idea. It's just I've had to think about it differently. And I just thank God for the whole process that he's taken me through. You know, I don't know where this is going to go, but I teach, like Chuck might have said, I teach all over the world, India, Ukraine, the whole bit, and I'm teaching young pastors theology. Well, through that process of teaching the atonement and all of that, this work has come. You know, what did Jesus do on my behalf? You know, so I don't need to worry about I got to keep the law because he's already kept it for me. And now I come from a position of strength and victory in him. And yeah, he's left me some rewiring issues, but God is I'm able to measure the change that's going on in my brain by how long I kind of stay under. And it's been remarkable. Even yesterday, I was telling Chuck, my wife and I were kind of at each other yesterday. But what God was showing me is normally if I'm triggered, I'll go under for a little while and it takes a little while. I was coming back up a lot faster yesterday than, well, that's just the work of his grace in me. And okay, that's part of why I came here, you know. So, yeah, I appreciate what you said, Robert. That's, you never know how this is going to go when you're talking to people you don't know. But, yeah, Christ is, if I could sum it all up, I'd say, you don't need anything but Jesus, you know, and that's literally true because he controls everything and all things are through him and by him and for him. So that's kind of my story, like I said. And
well, one thing on that and how you can share, and this builds tremendous transparency. When you build transparency, you build connections. Part of that transparency is surrender. You have to surrender. You have to say, I can't do this alone. And it, like the word talks about in Romans 12, is not conformed, but being transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. The word is so clear. When the Bible talks about the heart, it usually is talking about the mind. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, right? Yeah. There's this new age movement that talks about this, you know, law of attraction, all this other nonsense that is straight from the pit of hell. However, what they discovered is that God has given us a tremendous power in our mind to create realities. And what you've developed, my friend, I hope you see this, is a roadmap. You can use this, and I don't know if you do, with these young pastors. They're going to be in a counseling role at some point, and they're going to have some trauma that's happened to them or to someone in their congregation they care about. And you can use your, you know, acrostic, your mnemonic, you know, your way of looking at this to help them establish a roadmap. So I think you got something powerful there. And then ultimately it is the work of the Holy Spirit, but we do have a role to do, because who controls your thoughts? Who controls my thoughts? I do. Am I going to let that thought in, or am I going to stop it at the gate, at the door? You got to stop. Why? Because as a seed comes in, it's going to bring forth whatever. As a man sow it, or soweth he, so he will reap, right? So what are we sowing? You sow poor seeds, and I talked about what the word talks about, focusing on things that are good, right, and true. You're establishing those positive neural patterns. He's the manufacturer of this thing, just like Apple built the iPod and the iPad. They know how to fix it. God knows how to fix this thing between our ears. And again, I really believe he's given you a platform now to honor him first and foremost, but to help people in the flesh today, and it will happen in a supernatural way because the Holy Spirit's going to work through you. For greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world.
Sure. Well, I want to give Chuck credit for this outline because I just kind of exploded on the first group this morning, and he said, "Wait a minute, let's kind of put this in order." I had all this material in my brain, and
Sure.
getting it out in some kind of coherent order has been really helpful. So,
Good.
are there any other questions?
Yeah, let me make a comment. It's totally different track. Chuck, have you heard of Patriot Paws?
I have Chuck muted. He was getting, Chuck, can you
Oh.
talk through Jim's?
He can
Patriot
unmute
Paws?
himself. Patriot Paws, they're service dogs.
Yeah.
They are trained by the prisoners at the state prison in Huntsville. And when they get the dogs trained, they bring in veterans with PTSD.
Oh, Patriot
They-
Pals. Okay, I thought you said
It's
Paul.
paws,
Oh,
P-A-W-S,
PAWS.
Yes, okay.
like a dog.
I think they're over in Rockwall.
They've got, they will line up 20 trained dogs and 20 veterans that need a dog. The thing I like, the dog picks the person. They tell
Wow.
the dogs, go find your person. They go find somebody that's their dog. And another good thing from that, they say, of the people that walk out the front door at Huntsville prisoners, 85% of them will be back within 2 years.
Yeah.
They have had one dog trainer come back. The rest of them don't come back.
Mm.
So the dog
Wow.
helps the trainer, the prisoner, and
Yeah.
they help the person with PTSD. The dog doesn't judge you. I can come say, oh, that guy, he's flipped out. The dog isn't going to say that. They're going to say, hey, feed me, rub me, whatever. And they bought.
Yeah.
And it seems to be doing some real good.
Yeah.
Listen, one of the things I want to bring up is the reason I've been doing all of this is because I think Jim's got a phenomenal message. It's a message that needs to be heard. And one of the things about it, it's good that Rotary's hearing this so that they can understand it. But the thing that happens is not only Rotary, but the vets need to hear this. The military need to hear this. Those in the Veterans Hospital need to hear this. And what happened is, if there's any way that you have suggestions or things that you could help Jim expand this, that's what I think he needs, because I think the country and the people need it more than anything. So if y'all can help out, we would appreciate that very much.
Well, Howard has recorded this, and this will go on our YouTube channel so that we get other people that come in and listen to it.
Well, great. Thank you.
And if Chuck has told you or not,
When you do that, make sure you put that sheet that I sent you that has the how to order that book or who to order the book from and everything, so that it, he's not benefiting money wise on the book, but the organization that he's backing and how they're doing getting this communication out is, and we need to make sure that they have the funds to do what they need to do.
one of the comment, we've got 63 Rotary clubs or so in our district. Our governor, one of her things they want every club to do this year is to do something to support veterans.
Yeah.
And And in Grand Prairie, we have a really good Veterans Day ceremony. Well, Veterans Day and Memorial Day, they have two
Right.
times a year. And they have a good program, good speakers, and so forth. Anyhow, okay, are we running out of time, Linda?
So,
6:28.
But
It's
I'm not in a
6:28.
big hurry.
It's,
Charlotte was
well,
on for a
Charlotte has
while.
had to leave. Charlotte came on earlier and she's had just left. And, so she apologizes for that, but she had to get on. So anyway,
And-
she just left a few minutes ago.
And someday we may get this together where everything works. But anyway,
And Chuck and Howard and everybody can see what they're doing.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
I could see it.
Howard, do you want to lead us in the four-way test?
Sure. The four-way test are the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the
Is
truth?
Is it the
Truth.
truth?
Second, is it fair to all?
Fair
Fair
to
to
all
all
concerned.
concerned.
Third, will build good.
Will
Will
it
it
build
build
goodwill
goodwill
and
and better
friendship?
friendships?
Fourth, will be
Would be beneficial to all concerned.
Ding.
Ding.
Yeah.
See you
Hell,
next week.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We had a Marine colonel talk to our club once, and he took our four-way test, and I forget what you call it in the Marines, but you've got a similar thing, starts out with always tell the truth, and he went
Yeah.
through how close what Rotary's supposed to be doing with what the Marines are supposed to do. So, oh,
there we go.
somebody found a bell.
God bless you.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
thank you all.
Thank you all. We
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Thanks.
All
Jim.
right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.